The election is just in 5 days, and Donald Trump is looking in a really strong position in my final electoral college map forecast. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another video with On Point Politics. Make sure to hit the like button and to subscribe if you want more content just like this, and follow me on X in the description down below. And so this has been a crazy election cycle. I mean, we had Donald Trump enter the race in the beginning of pretty much 2023, really, and Joe Biden ended up throwing his hat into the ring at some point later on. So the election's been going on for roughly 2 years. This has actually been one of the longer election cycles, which unfortunately will affect the Democrats because of the fact that they've been in the spotlight as an unpopular administration for quite some time, ever since the 2022 midterms. Now, looking at the Electoral College, what's very fascinating is everybody thinks this is going to be a close election. Everybody believes that it's going to come down to the three, swing states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Everybody thinks that, it's going to come down to these states, which technically those will be the tipping point battlegrounds. But I actually hold an opinion that most don't have, and that this election isn't going to be close. Donald Trump will defeat Kamala Harris very handedly in the Electoral College, according to my computer modeling for the 2024 election. Now, you guys may be skeptical, saying, well, there's actually no way that that could happen, but I'm going to break this down very simply for you using my best indicators for this election. So my 2020 election model looked like this. I get the 306 Joe Biden victory to Donald Trump's 232 Electoral College win. And we see right here that's exactly what happened, with some of the margins being slightly different. The model only having a 0.3 percentage point miss in the Republican direction nationwide when you average out all of the polling errors. But for the most part, it was actually a pretty decent model as of right now. It would have been one of the only models to get every single state correct. And looking at the Electoral College map now, Donald Trump, according to the most accurate pollster from 2020 and 2022, right now, Donald Trump in the latest poll that was just dropped today on the national level has Donald Trump winning by roughly 2 points in the full ballot, with the third-party candidates included. We see that there's a little bit more undecided voters. Usually they're polling without undecideds. Actually has Donald Trump doing a little bit better. So that's kind of interesting as to why they've been polling the national race so much. But I've noticed that Kamala Harris's vote share hasn't really moved. It's Donald Trump's that's been moving while the undecideds go up. So I actually think their, 3 to 3.5 point victory margin is actually a little bit better than what they've been putting out more recently. But when we look, we see Donald Trump is getting pretty decent margins. I mean, he's getting 44% of the Asian vote. Black voters, he's getting about 24% here, getting 40% of Hispanics. He's doing pretty well with whites, and he's actually outright winning other voters, which is interesting. He's also winning 7% of Joe Biden voters from 2020, which is very fascinating. And he's winning the didn't vote / didn't remember vote by 7 percentage points, which is huge. He's winning independents by about 5 points in this poll as well. So very, very crazy stuff. He's barely losing suburban voters. He's actually barely losing women in this poll as well, which, again, another fascinating thing to show that the woman vote is not locked up for Kamala Harris like most political forecasters actually think it's going to be. And so this has been one of the more accurate polls, and it is the most accurate in the United States, and that's why I used it for this video. They were rated with a gold star by the New York Times. They were also rated one of the higher pollsters when Nate Plastic ended up rating them an A pollster for 538 back in 2020 before he got fired from the site. We also see in Brazil, he was the pollster, at least Atlas was, with the lowest amount of polling error there in Brazil's presidential election in 2022. Been pretty good in Chile, as well as in the last 3 elections in Argentina, and a lot more. Even in Colombia, they were doing pretty good as well. And so even looking here in Spain, we also see that their polling error was basically less than 0.1%. I mean, that's actually nuts. Look at that. Look at that polling miss there. You see they were pretty close, but their polling error was very low compared to everybody else in that race as well. And they've been polling all over the world. So they have a very sophisticated understanding of electoral politics everywhere. And Donald Trump is running away with this in the popular vote, because if he's winning the popular vote by 2 to 4, which is kind of the range they've put out, that is roughly moving from a 4.5 point win for Joe Biden. That is around a 6 to 9 point swing Republican nationwide. And when you have big swing elections like that, all of the close states from the previous election almost certainly wouldn't be going in the same party's column. Now, looking at this Gallup article that was also written, we see here party affiliation and a lot of other key issues were polled, and we see that Republicans lead on party identification by 3. It's been a pretty accurate indicator of theirs the past couple cycles. They have a 3-point lead. Party better able handle to the most important problem. Republicans up 5, and that is economy and immigration. U.S. satisfaction down at 22%. We can actually see here that when it's at 22%, or at least the economic confidence, we see minus 28. That is almost as bad as it was back in 1992. And we even see here U.S. satisfaction as well. Looking at all of the years where you had less than a 25% satisfaction rating for the United States, you saw in 1992, we saw that Bill Clinton ended up winning that election pretty easily against the incumbent party. We also see in 2024, that's the current year, 1980, 19% U.S. satisfaction. We see that Ronald Reagan destroyed his opponent massively. And we see in 2008, we see about 13% of voters viewed the nation nationally. And that's when Obama won pretty big in the Electoral College. So you see that, in years where the approval rating is around where it is right now, you see that more than likely it's a bigger landslide, blowout election. And we see here presidential job approval. Joe Biden's only at 39% and is well below the 48% for past presidents to be reelected, which is really, really interesting. And we see here that Kamala Harris, 44% of voters approve of her job as vice president of the United States, according to this Gallup survey, which has been tracking metrics since 1948 in presidential elections. They've been one of the most oldest polling companies in a while, and all of their metrics actually predict the presidential election fairly accurately, except for 2000. There's a lot of fundamentals that kind of didn't work out in 2000, but Donald Trump is in a very strong position based off all these metrics to also win in an electoral college landslide. And even looking at the RCP aggregate, Donald Trump is up nationally by roughly, give or take, 0.5%. And the problem with that is, let's go to a state. We could look at any of these, really. Let's go to a state like North Carolina. Trump's polling ahead by 1.4% in North Carolina. Even if we go back since 2004, we've seen that the state has actually voted by 10 points to the right of the nation. In 2004, it was voting that many points Republican right of the nation. Then in 2008, we saw that the state was polling about 7 points to the right of the nation. If we actually pull it up right here, I believe we'll be able to check that. We can actually see that the state was voting about 7 points to the right of the nation. So again, the state, even in 2012, once again, we look at the state voting 6 points to the right of the nation. Then we see here, looking at the state once again, going to like 2016, the state, as of right now, is voting 5.8 percentage points to the right. And then here we see in 2020, it was voting about 6 points, 5.8% to the right. So it's kind of been trending left, but the trend left has actually been slowing down. If anything, it trends Republican due to Donald Trump's gain with African-American voters. And what's very fascinating is we see that Donald Trump is doing very well in North Carolina. All the accurate pollsters have him winning the state by 4 or more. And it's probably going to be going in his column. So the fact that the polls have the national average at 0.5 and Trump is only leading North Carolina by 1.4 tells you that the polls are going to be wrong. Even in Georgia, the state of Georgia won't probably poll to the right of the nation by it won't be a 2-point difference between the popular vote. Given the fact Donald Trump's improving with all demographics nationwide, it'll probably be about, a 5+ point victory or more. And we'll actually get into some of my margins as well when we go through the map here. But for example, Wisconsin, the last 2 elections, Wisconsin has been voting 4 points to the right of the nation. How is Donald Trump going to be leading in the popular vote by 5.5 and Wisconsin vote to the left of the nation? It's just not going to happen, guys. That's how you know that the polls are going to be incorrect. And so basically going all these metrics and whatnot, Donald Trump is in a very strong position to win the 2024 election, given my modeling. And we see Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, all of Nebraska, except the 2nd Congressional District will be safe Republican. Kansas, Oklahoma, Alaska, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, as well as Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, Missouri, Iowa, Ohio will be in the safe Republican column, including South Carolina, as well as Maine at large, or the 2nd Congressional District. Those are going to be the safe Republican areas in this forecast. Iowa and Ohio about 16 points each as of right now. You know, states like Kansas, South Carolina about in 20 ranges. Alaska is only going to be like a 17-point win, so it's going to shift Republican less than the nationwide margin, so it is going to trend left, but you do see a big gain for Republicans here compared to 2020, and so in all of these Republican states. Now, looking at the safe Democrat states, Kamala Harris is winning California by 19.8% in my forecast. And historically, she's actually been a pretty weak candidate in the state of California. She barely won her attorney general's race in 2010 against a no-name Republican. And even though it was a red wave, it's still very shocking that she narrowly won that race. She should have won that race by about over 10 points minimum in a place like California. The governor candidate won by 10. So the fact that she almost lost and only won the state by a few thousand votes against a no-name in an attorney general's race is pretty concerning for her electorally. And when she ran for the Senate in 2016, she beat a more conservative Democrat and didn't even win the Hispanic vote statewide. So electorally, she's been pretty weak. Hawaii, about a 17, 18-point win for Kamala Harris. You did have the Maui fires there. However, I still think it's going to be in the safe Democrat column, but it will be one of the more Republican trending states in the nation. And if it does fall below 15 points, don't be surprised, because a lot of the polling with Joe Biden in the race was pretty close. District of Columbia, Maryland, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Maine's first will all be in the safe Democrat column in this forecast, giving Harris just 86 safe electoral college votes. Looking at the swing states, Texas and Florida will be about 14-point wins each. And Florida is very interesting because right now, if we go to votehub.com, you'll actually see that Donald Trump in the state of Florida is winning the early vote by pretty impressive amounts, or at least Republicans are. You can't really track exactly how many, mail-in, ballots are going which way or another. But Donald Trump, at least the Republican Party, is absolutely killing it in returns. I mean, they're ahead in Miami-Dade, they're ahead in Hillsborough, they're ahead in Pinellas County, they're up in Duval as well. So it's very interesting how they're leading in all of these counties right now before the election day votes even coming in. And about 6.2 million votes were casted in this election so far in the state of Florida, which is very interesting. And Republicans are up by quite a bit in the state of Florida. So this is definitely a good sign that Republicans are going to win the state by double digits as of right now. So looking at Donald Trump in some of the other battlegrounds, Georgia and North Carolina are about 8.5 and 8-point victories right now. He is winning Georgia and North Carolina by pretty good margins. I mean, right now, the Souls to the Polls movement to get black voters, that day passed, and the electorate in Georgia only went up by 0.12% more black. And right now, the African-American vote share in the early vote is down to like less than 26%. And it was closer to 30 back in 2020 when Joe Biden picked off the state back in that election. So again, very bad metrics for Kamala Harris in the state of Georgia and in North Carolina. It seems that as at this point, they're really not going to be competitive. Arizona and Nevada are also in the likely column in this video. Nevada at about 5 points and Arizona at about 7 points. Donald Trump, we see in the early returns in Arizona on L2 dashboard, Republicans are up by almost 200,000 votes in the early vote in Arizona, which there could be some early voters that are like McCain Republicans. But again, in Arizona, the election day vote's always more Trumpy. It's always more America First and Republican. And so even if a lot of those McCain types did come out to early vote, it still won't be enough to offset it. Republicans almost have an 100,000 vote lead in Maricopa County in the early voting when Democrats were up by a little bit more than that back then. So there's been huge deltas towards Republicans in a state like Arizona and Nevada. Nevada, the culinary unions are endorsing Donald Trump there. The no tax on tips is a pretty big deal. So more signs that there's a big momentum boost in a place like Nevada and Arizona. And Donald Trump gaining with Hispanics nationwide is definitely going to help him out in a place like Nevada and Arizona. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania all around in the 6 to 7 point range. Wisconsin at about 7 points, Michigan at 6.5, and Wisconsin at like 6.3. Michigan's actually voting to the right of Pennsylvania in my modeled forecast, which is really interesting. I don't know why exactly that is. I think it is that way because of the fact that Donald Trump is gaining with African American and Hispanics, but in Michigan, there's more prevalent groups like protesters of the Israel-Hamas war. There's a lot of more Muslim voters, and there's actually more non-college educated voters in Michigan than there is in Pennsylvania. So with this kind of brew of a perfect storm for Donald Trump, it is possible that Michigan breaks off and actually votes slightly more Republican than Pennsylvania does. So that could actually be something that happens. I'd say it's unlikely. Pennsylvania will probably vote to the right of Michigan, but it isn't out of the question. Now, looking at the likely Democrat states, Washington and Oregon are around 11 and 9 points each for Kamala Harris. Colorado just a 7-point win for Kamala Harris when it was about 13.5 last time. Hispanics are going to play a big part in that, as well as every other demographic, but Colorado also has a lot of Hispanics like New Mexico, not as much as New Mexico, but it still has quite a bit. So that's why you're seeing such a big shift towards Donald Trump in Colorado, even though Democrats have been gaining in voter registration in that one state alone since 2022. Illinois is another state that's going to be closer than expected. It was a 17-point win for Joe Biden last time around. Right now, I only have it as an 8 or 9-point win for Kamala Harris because of the black vote shifting. A lot of young black men turning out in a place like Chicago, so that's going to be something really fascinating. New York, about roughly give or take a 9-point win in the state of New York. Again, guys, it's not going to flip. It's not going to be one of those sleeper flips, at least as of right now in my analysis. But I can tell you there is a possibility it is under a 10-point margin for Kamala. And we'll know really quick because they start counting relatively at, I believe, at like 8 or 9 p.m. Eastern. Rhode Island, Connecticut, as well as Delaware and New Jersey will be in the likely Democrat column. New Jersey only being a 6.5-point win for Kamala, which is about 10 points more Republican than last time. So you're seeing a Republican trend in New Jersey. And so looking at all those states that are under 5 points in my forecast, those being relatively deeper blue states that all went to Joe Biden pretty easily in the last election, a lot of new polling is actually tying up here and has actually shown competitive races in all of these states. I mean, New Mexico, we can start off with this one, a 2.5-point win for Kamala Harris. It was going to Donald Trump in my earlier models, but the new polling suggests that Kamala Harris will probably end up winning it by about 2.5 in my modeled forecast. Virginia, just a 1.2 percentage point win for Kamala in the state of Virginia. Very fascinating that in a state like Virginia, Donald Trump is only losing it by about a point, which is what Quantus Insights has in the state as of right now. Rasmussen reports, somewhat inaccurate pollster, has a Harris +2. So all the accurate and people that are acting in good faith have the state relatively close. And Kamala Harris pulled out resources from North Carolina to actually put them into Virginia. So that should kind of tell you everything that you need to know about the race there. And now looking at some of the northern states, right now Minnesota is barely flipping in the Republican column in this forecast. Nebraska second is in the lean Democrat column. I actually think it's in the tilt Democrat column in my forecast as of right now. Now, this district will be trending to the left by quite a bit. Minnesota, on the other hand, is interesting because it is flipping, and this is probably going to be the closest call. Right now, it is a 0.4 percentage point margin rounded in my forecast. And if we actually look at the state, it was a 7-point win in the last election. So it's very fascinating because Donald Trump if he were to win this state, he would break history. I mean, it's the last time this state was won by a Republican. It was in 1972 when Nixon ended up winning the state of Minnesota by just about 6 points in an R+22 national environment. So the state has been voting closer to the nation as of right now. So I do actually think that it is a toss-up. Again, the model has him flipping it. I'm not saying it's guaranteed to go to Donald Trump, but it definitely will be in the toss-up category. New Hampshire is actually a 1.2 percentage point win for my forecast. The state was narrowing up in my forecast for quite a long time now and did flip Republican recently and is now starting slowly but surely to turn into a lean Republican state. I mean, Rasmussen, a pretty accurate pollster, has a Harris +1 result, and he thinks this polling is too much to the left. And we even saw a New Hampshire Journal poll having Donald Trump up in the state of New Hampshire by 0.4%. And this has been very recent polling out of the state. And so it's very interesting to see all of this now come out for Donald Trump. And the last state on the map, Maine at large, has 0.7 percentage point win for Kamala Harris. There was actually a student mock election that's held there every 4 years, and Donald Trump crushed Kamala Harris in 115 different schools across the state by about 11 points. And the state margin for that mock election has actually always been within the margin of error of what's actually occurred there. Now, do I think he's going to win the state by 11? No, but clearly it shows that the young, growing population of Republican voters and senior voters moving more Democrat is definitely happening. I do think that is actually going to happen this cycle, because if seniors don't move and Republican, younger people are voting Republican like that, you're going to be getting a pretty bad result for Kamala Harris on election night, way worse than a lot of people would even be expecting. And so this is it for my final map, guys. We've been doing this for about roughly 11 months now. I started this channel back in January. I am going to be posting content, podcast. I'll probably be, having people on the show, talking about my map, seeing what's going to happen. And I will be with Tom Ellsworth and Amy Dangerfield covering the election at the Election Night in America event hosted by Valuetainment and Patrick Bet-David. So make sure on election night to go check that out, guys. And we will see you guys in the next video.